All right, we're live. So, March, welcome to March again, 2021 edition. Um, this month, I'm going to jump right in because we have a very, very busy guest, Armin Briegel. Welcome, Armin.
Welcome. Well, yeah, thank you for having me. It's so glad to be here. It's been a long time and finally we get to do it.
I know I'm happy like that we've met in person. Like that's one of these nice things that like we see each other at conferences. Um, And what was it, 2019? Max Sysadmin, you graciously lent me some of your slide deck. So like, yeah, we've uh, we've met in person. And yeah, I miss seeing everyone in person. Really, um, I mentioned that you're busy because I reached out to ask you if you would join us today, and you said, "Yeah, that'd be great." That's right before I go on the Command Control Power podcast. So like, you're just sandwiching us in between all these all these meetings. Who's Command Control Power? Talk about that a little, because I know I've heard of them. I don't recall. I don't think I listened to them. So
Well, Command Control Power, they are three guys, and it's very embarrassing because I have to think of their names right now. Joe Saponari and
oh yeah.
oh my, this is so embarrassing. I hope they're not listening because they're preparing for the podcast later. You can look it up on their website. They are Apple consultants and MSPs.
Okay.
And they have a podcast that has been going on for a long time. They hit their 400th episode on a weekly podcast just recently.
Excellent.
And yes, so they overlap somewhat into the MacAdmin space,
Yeah.
but they are mostly towards the consultants, which is not really the space I'm in most of the time. But it's still an interesting podcast, and they are fun to listen to.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, the MSP thing is not exactly my world either. And on a different note, like I know I only have so much attention span for podcasts, and like some podcasts can get like any podcast that weighs in at an hour or more. Like those are the ones that are always challenging for me to kind of fit in. Um, but yeah. So anyway, if you're interested in what Armin's saying today, go listen to him on Control Power Command Control Shift Delete later on.
Yes.
Um,
It's been a while since Command Control Power was actually a thing on the Mac. So, it's one of those things like my own website is scripting OS 10,
yeah.
which is definitely a relic now. And I'm kind of fond of it, but maybe I should think about changing that.
Do you correct people that say scripting OS X?
All the time. I used to work at Apple. That's so ingrained.
Yes.
You just don't.
Yeah. So for the people who aren't familiar with you, give us a little like, who are you? Where were you? What were you doing? What are you doing?
Well, my name is Armin Briegel. I currently live in the Netherlands, though I am originally German, and I have lived in the States in between for 11 years. I have worked for Apple Germany, Apple US. I was a sysadmin at University of Southern California, and now I work for a reseller, Apple authorized enterprise reseller in the Netherlands, and also work on the side freelance on my own stuff. I write books and give presentations and a weblog.
Okay. So you mentioned scripting OS 10. Um, I think that's in the community, that's your Twitter handle. I might be the only person that follows you on Mastodon, on Mastodon social. So thank you for that. I find
You
Mastodon.
are not. I think
Okay.
I have 9 or 10 followers there.
Okay. But I'll tell you, Mastodon is gloriously little noise. Like it's like for the people that I follow on Mastodon, it's super high signal and very low noise. So it's I still find it really useful. But talk about that aspect of your existence, scripting OS 10, the handle, why that handle, and so on.
Well, I started that weblog. That weblog actually turned 10 a few months ago.
Congratulations.
Um, and it was after I left Apple, and Apple has changed a bit since I worked there more than 10 years ago. But back then, having a personal weblog while you were at Apple was definitely a no-no.
Mm.
But when I left Apple and I started working at the University of Southern California as a sysadmin, and I had to put theory into practice, I felt like, this is something I want to share. And there were people around back then, Rich Troughton already, Ben Toms with MacMule, and Greg Nagel, of course, who had managing OS 10, which, might have been an inspiration. Um, I thought, I can do that too. I started that weblog. And to be honest, for the first 5 years, if I got to one post a month, that was a good month.
We've
And
all
I
we've all
think
had
many
we've all been
weblogs,
we've all been there, right? We've all had those months where it's like,
yeah.
man, if I just get out that one post, it's a good month.
And I tried different approaches, like, just sharing links or just writing short things or writing longer articles. And it was really great because I got to practice writing, which I had done for work before. Of course, when you're a consultant or even a freelancer, you have to write reports and all of that stuff and documentation. But writing for a weblog is a different thing that you have to practice.
Yeah, yeah, it is, no doubt. And yeah,
And then,
I've gone through the ups and downs of like having a long streak and then tailing off and having a longer streak. And yeah, I don't make New Year's resolutions per se, but I seem to have fairly higher output like at the beginning of the year, and then it slowly trails off.
and I mean, even now when you look at my weblog, I have great months where there's lots of interesting posts, and then some months I do a weekly newsletter, which forces me to post once a week. So I am a Twitter junkie, not necessarily Twitter, but going through the feed, seeing what other people are talking about. I have NetNewsWire full of RSS feeds, which I love. And I pick out stuff, and I used to have the habit that on Friday mornings at work, I would go through the open browser tabs, of which there would be dozens accumulated over the week. And my goal was that on Friday, I close all the browser tabs and either save the bookmarks that the stuff you want to read, or just close them and say, I'll find it again if I need it. Of course, you never go back to the stuff you want to read. Sometimes you read stuff and catch up if you have time. And I turned that into the habit of, well, on Friday, I summarize the interesting stuff I found and put it on my weblog. Um, I like the aspect. I always thought there are so many great people, especially in the MacAdmins community, who are sharing their knowledge on their weblogs for free. And these things are hard to find. And it's hard to take notice of. And I thought, like, if there's one spot where somebody curates and summarizes all of this, then everybody gets their small 5 minutes of fame every week. And at least people can see, like, look, this person is sharing something. It's really great.
Yeah.
And
And just before you go on too much, I want to thank you for the weekly roundup. I read it. I think it's really useful. For anyone who doesn't subscribe to that, go subscribe, because it is really useful. And in the pre-show, Henry was asking me a little bit about a new role that I'm in, and I went from paying very close attention to the Mac admin space and community, and I like to think help lead that in some ways over the years, to a role in security research where I wasn't really front and center a Mac admin, but I always kept it on the periphery. And now I'm in a security role. I guess you could most closely call it like Mac platform hardening. That would be the closest thing I could call it. So I'm not exactly a Mac admin but I'm definitely very impacted by everything in that space. So I'm back to really paying attention and trying to go through MacAdmins and Slack and keep up with all the things, which of course is impossible. So anytime I get a succinct summary that I can just sort of look through, that's fantastic. So yeah, I appreciate that work. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad, and I get a lot of feedback from other people, and I'm so happy. And the nicest thing that makes me happy, but also a bit embarrassed, is when people thank me for featuring
Yeah,
their post or their work in the newsletter, and it makes me happy, definitely. But I'm also like, you got it the wrong way around. I'm so grateful that you wrote something that is awesome, and I have something to add to my list of links in there
yes,
because, yeah, I think that's the awesome thing.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Um, but I guess back to the question at hand, why scripting OS 10?
Well, I have always, and always, and this goes back to I got my first Mac, the one that I owned myself, that I could buy myself, was a PowerBook 160, and it came with System 7.1 Pro. And back then, AppleScript was new. And I just loved AppleScript. It was like you could automate small things, you could play around with it, you could fool with it, and back then I figured out pretty quickly that you could actually earn money with it because people needed this AppleScript glue between FileMaker and Quark Express back then, or Illustrator or whatever, and that was great. I've always loved automation and workflows. I have always loved the Unix underpinnings of macOS 10. Without macOS 10, I probably would have left the Mac sphere in the early 2000s.
Agreed.
But because of the combination of the Unix underpinnings, I was just like, oh yeah, I can do anything I need. Everything I have. I have the UI, I have the business apps, but I also have the Unix underpinnings and all the weird tools and great tools you get for that. I've always loved that part. So scripting had to be in the name, and if I ever remove the relic of OS 10 from the domain name, the scripting will stay in there.
Yeah. But I think nowadays when we think of scripting, most people probably aren't thinking of AppleScript.
No, unfortunately. Well, and AppleScript has this weird place in macOS right now where it's still there. It still does what it used to do, but it's probably not getting the attention it might deserve. And everybody looks at it and says, "Well, what's going on there?" Um, and especially then, I work as a consultant and a Mac admin. Um, in that space, AppleScript has its uses, but the focus is obviously shell scripting.
Yes. So what? Again, I still find a lot of people uh, in the Mac admin space ignoring terminal and Bash and Z Shell and Python. So for the people who might hear this and not be familiar with it, what does that environment give us?
I think it always has, and it still does. It gives us a different perspective on the operating system. The Finder and interacting with the graphical interface and everything, that's useful and great, and it has strengths. But when I open Terminal, I can access different parts of the operating system at a different level of granularity. I can see things, some things I can control much more precisely. If you need to work on hundreds of files at once, the terminal is usually more flexible than when I use the graphical interface. Um, Other things are more complicated in the shell. There's no argument there. Some things are hideously complicated if you have to do them in the command line. Thankfully, on macOS, they aren't really two separate aspects. I can easily switch back and forth between the two worlds and choose the best tool at the right moment. And you have all the Unix tools that come from this 50-year history of Unix, with all their strengths and with all the baggage that they bring along. So it is intimidating. I know. I mean, nobody is born with these knowledge, and you look at these things, and there's 1,300, more than 1,300 command line tools on macOS, on a plain macOS, without installing anything. And I don't know all of them. And I still encounter some, and I'm like, I've never heard of this before, and that looks nifty. And even those that I might have used occasionally, I have to look up the documentation if it exists, because I can't remember all the options and the weird syntax. So it's very intimidating because of that, but it's also very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And as Mac admins, or even in the security space, you want that power at your fingertips. You want to be able to use that.
Yeah, absolutely. So tying this together with some of your presentations at conferences, I know you've been speaking about Z Shell or Z Shell or Zish, however we're going to pronounce it. Tell us why you started talking about Z Shell.
Well, I have always been, as a Mac admin, and also as an Apple employee, I have always stuck to the defaults from Apple, which has been Bash since macOS Panther 10.3. Surprisingly, not from the very beginning, but Apple switched to Bash in 10.3, which was 2003. I have to look that up. And I've stuck with Bash as the default because I want to sit down at any machine and just, be able to start working and not think about, oh no, I have to switch this, I have to configure this. Even though for many years, many people have told me, you should try Z Shell. If you like the shell, you should try Z Shell. It is much better. And one of the reasons Z Shell is much better than Bash is that Apple stuck with Bash 3.2, which is from 2007. It had gotten a few updates in between, but it's basically a 14-year-old binary. And the reason Apple has never moved to the newer versions of Bash, which are out there, Bash 5.1 is the current version, is the Bash project switched to the GPL3 license with version 4, and Apple won't touch that.
Yeah.
You can download Bash 5 and install it yourself. No problem, works great. But the Bash that Apple pre-installs on macOS is Bash version 3.
Yep.
And you could have predicted it. I never really thought about it, but I should have seen it coming. When Catalina was announced at Developers Conference 2019, Apple said the default shell will be Z Shell from now on. It won't be Bash anymore. It will be Z Shell. And they never actually said it, but the implication there is, this is really old. We're probably going to remove this at some point in the future. And I looked at that and said, well, maybe it's time for me to switch to Z Shell. And I'm sure many people will have an issue with that or just problems. And I started documenting my path from Bash to Z Shell on my weblog. It started out as a series on the weblog. It's still, that series is on the top of my web traffic charts after nearly 2 years now. And then at my work, we wanted to do an event, a Dutch MacAdmins meeting, and we needed a topic. And I'm like, yeah, I can turn that into a topic. And I did a presentation there. And then Mac sysadmin in 2019, that seemed like just the right topic. And of course, because I had worked through that topic a few times already, that presentation turned out quite well. And
that presentation was fantastic. And before I forget, speaking of Mac sysadmin, you definitely win Mac sysadmin 2020 with the flying to the secret lab video. That was fantastic. And if anyone hasn't seen that, please go watch at least the first few minutes of Armin's video from Mac Sysadmin 2020.
Yes, I think I spent at least 4 times as much time on that short sequence than on the entire rest of the presentation. And I spent a lot of time on the rest of the presentation.
Yeah. I think to digress for a second, first, just with virtual conferences, like it's so tough being apart from everyone. But I think Mac Sysadmin struck a really nice balance. And I loved watching everyone's videos because everyone took us like a slightly different take on not being together, Greg Nagel's video was also really kind of cool. He just sort of like, okay, pretend you're in Gothenburg and you just took the tram from here and you got your coffee and, all the things we would do on a sort of normal morning. And that was like a nice reminder. And different people had like really interesting takes on it, which I thought was really nice.
What I liked
we
about
all had fun
Greg,
with it.
yeah, what I liked about Greg is that he took the chance and said, well, I don't have to do one 50-minute session. He just broke it into 3 smaller sessions because they were slightly different or quite different topics. And I thought that was like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's very obvious.
And
of course,
that was the unique thing that, Patrick, who runs Mac Sysadmin, basically said, like, well, being that we're not in a conference hall having to match these blocks of time, he was open to just like, let's just get interesting content. And if it's 20 minutes, great. If it's 50 minutes, great. Which was nice. It gave some variety to sitting down and watching these videos,
But I also have to say that I really admired your session where you took the notion that we are now letting everybody into our living rooms with all these Zoom calls and everything. You took that to the wonderful conclusion, and I admired that. I watched that and said, yeah, that's just how it is. Everybody is in my living room. I rearranged a shelf. You must have rearranged your entire living room. I admired that.
No, I didn't rearrange anything. Thank you. I appreciate that. But I did leave up some, lights, and I left the tripods in place for recording, which that probably drove my wife a little nuts, because it is funny putting these things together. Like you said, you spent like this seemingly silly amount of time into some frivolous piece of this video, but it really like stood out and it made it. And same thing, like, even though I was just recording this from home, it easily took me as much time as putting together a traditional slide deck and rehearsing it and making sure it's right and tweaking and, all those things. So it was fun. It was different. I can't say that I prefer one over the other necessarily. They both had, I think, their strengths and weaknesses, but it did allow a bunch of people to have a lot of fun.
Yeah, you're definitely learning new skills. I myself, I have used iMovie before, but never as much as in the last year.
Yeah, right.
And you prepare your slides differently. I mean, when I stand on stage, and especially Mac Sysadmin, where they insist on 50-minute presentations, and every 5 minutes more is really difficult to fill. But now I can when I stand on stage, I rehearse until I know it by heart, because I can't read when I'm on stage. I'm too nervous. I need to know the flow of the presentation just like that. So I need a lot of rehearsal. But when I record it, I can record 5-minute segments, and I record them 4 or 5 times until I'm like, yeah, that's okay, that's decent. And then I cut those together. It's a completely different way of preparing a presentation. And
Absolutely. That's I don't know if
wonderful learning experience.
You can record in 5-minute segments, but I don't know if you saw that I put out a blooper reel with my video, because exactly those things, like there's all these unexpected, like, you're doing it and you fumble the line and you're like, I'm gonna redo it again. And I do it again and the phone rings in the middle of it because I'm home, right? And like, then do it again, like the doorbell rings or something happens. It's like, this is maddening. Like, how many times more do I want to repeat this this line? Fortunately, that didn't happen too often, but there are just these like little trip ups that like at the time are frustrating, but looking back, it's like, that was kind of fun. in hindsight, I can make fun of myself now. So yeah, presentations, Z Shell. You were writing about it on your weblog, but you've also now turned that into a book.
Yeah, the Moving to Z Shell book I actually published in late 2019, pretty much after the MacAdmin presentation. I sat down and I'm like, I just write it down and put it out there. And that was my second to last book. I started self-publishing books in 2016 when we moved from the States back to Europe. And I had kind of a break in between work. My wife was starting working as a professor here in Leiden in the Netherlands. And my son was 12 then, starting at a new school, and somebody had to basically keep the household together and everything running. And I stayed at home, and I didn't want to stop working. I wanted to keep my ideas fresh and in the contact. So I started like writing books. I'd always wanted to do that, but you never find the time to do that. The first one was in 2016, packaging.
Right, right.
And then I published sometimes a very small book every year. 2019 was moving to Z Shell. And then 2020, with all the things that happened in the world, I just didn't. I wanted to finish a book, but I couldn't. But I was able to finish it. I finished it over the Christmas vacation break.
Okay. So,
And by the time it went to the proofreaders and everything, it was February, and I just published it a few weeks ago.
yeah, so talk about
And
that. Tell us about it.
that is macOS Terminal and Shell.
Okay.
And you've already heard me gush about macOS Terminal. I mean, that's also very timely because that was always the first book I wanted to write, but then I chose other topics because I thought they would be more relevant and easier to contain. And that certainly turned out to be true. Also, the other books all have that sentence in there. You need to be comfortable in Terminal on macOS because we will use this in this book. We will throw command lines at you and all of these things. You should know this. And it always felt like a cop-out to not have a book that I could refer to. And there are a few books out there that are pretty good introducing the command line or Bash or Z Shell. There are even some that are specific for macOS. Some of them are getting fairly old.
Yeah.
Some of them are really current, but I always felt they were a bit too basic for the MacAdmin topics that I like to cover and I cover in the other books. So I tried to write that book. And it got to the point where I'm comfortable with publishing it, but I always say, like, when I publish the books, they're not finished. The nice thing about ebooks is they're software and I can push updates.
Tell me a little bit about that process. That's really interesting. Self-publishing. So where are you self-publishing? So I guess this is also a plug. Where can people go find these books?
So go to the Apple Books, formerly known as iBooks store, and search for either my name, Arnon Briegel, or macOS Terminal and Shell, which is the latest book, and you will find it. It actually, if you enter Terminal macOS, it's the #1 result. So did some lucky search optimization there.
So here we are in this amazing technological future where people can easily self-publish. Let me hear a little bit about that. I'm curious how easy that is and what your experience has been publishing on the Apple Bookstore.
So it is really easy. You have to get an Apple ID. It's basically like getting a developer account, but slightly different because the books are a different publishing platform. And that's literally all you have to get. And then you can build. It used to be iBooks Author. Apple
Right.
has
Right.
discontinued iBooks Author, but Pages now has most of the features to build EPUBs that iBooks Author had. Not quite all of them, but most of them. You write it in Pages, or you can write it in another tool, because you can basically upload any EPUB to Apple Books.
Mm-hmm.
And you upload it, you give it some metadata, you set a price, and Apple does a verification process on the book. And the first time you upload it, that actually might take 24 to 48 hours. I don't think that somebody actually reads it, but I think they scan the book for malware and other things. EPUBs are basically HTML.
Yeah.
With some extensions, so I guess you could put JavaScript and malicious software in there.
Well,
They scan for that.
can you use JavaScript for animations or some interactive content within a book?
You used to be able to do that with iBooks
Yeah.
Author. Pages, as far as I know, does not allow you to do that.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I remember the iBooks Author. Like that was always fascinating, and I think that was around, when I had like a 16 gig iPad, right? And like the OS is taking a few gig, and you see this iBook that was like, oh wow, this looks really cool, and you download it's like a 2 gig book, and you're like, holy, like like I can't keep this on my device all the time. Like I definitely think I have noticed since the move to Pages, like that's gotten better. Like the books have slimmed out a bit. I kind of split my digital reading between Apple Books and Kindle. And the one thing I can always say is that the Apple Books experience is always much better. The layout, the typography, there are just so many goofy things with Kindle where it looks like they took, I don't know, they just took like the Word file or something from a book and just like shoved it into Kindle. And like sometimes you get these oddball characters, you get these oddball line breaks. Like I've just flat out never seen that happen in Apple Books. So kudos to like however that's managed.
yeah, the only reason, well, no, the main reason I stick with Apple Books as the only platform I'm publishing on is A, it's super simple,
Mhm.
and B, it's the only platform in all of my testing that is able to handle movies
Mhm.
in EPUB books. And I've tried, and I like to include screen movies in the
Yeah.
books. They're tutorials basically and screen movies. Not everything is a screen movie, because then I'd end up with a gigabyte book as well. Um, but where appropriate, I really like to include them. And I have tried different platforms, and it never works. And if you build EPUBs for multiple platforms, it's like building websites for multiple browsers. You
Yeah.
suddenly have to have this big matrix of, I have to test this here and this there, and I gave up on that. It's just like I don't have enough time. I'd prefer to spend
Yeah.
my time writing rather than testing.
Yeah. And I guess really your target market will have access to Apple Books.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was about
Weirdly,
to ask on because I think you were exposing other platforms like LeanPub and that stuff. So that was the reasoning behind you stick with Apple now, with Apple
yes,
Publishing.
I have played around with other platforms, LeanPub for a while, and LeanPub has a really neat. They have their own Markdown language to build the books in an extension and everything, and I kind of like that process. But yeah, as soon as I tried to have videos in the
Yeah.
books, they were like, "No, we don't do that. Videos and EPUBs, you can't do that." I'm like, "Well, Apple can." Of course, we know that how Apple treats standards. I mean, they might just be the only one that do it. I don't know. I'm not going to judge how good it is. But again, the target market for my books are Mac users. So I don't think I lose too much by sticking with Apple Books.
Nice. That was good timing, Henry, because I was going to ask if anyone besides me had questions for Armin while we all have him, because monopolizing the conversation. But I always have more questions, so. So okay, with that, yeah, I'm curious. Back to conferences, which is one of my favorite topics. We spoke about Mac Sysadmin earlier? Have you attended any other events over this last year?
Well, since we were stuck at home, I actually, and all the conferences had to go virtual, I was like, yes, I can present at conferences that I probably wouldn't have traveled to.
Yep.
And I signed up for the PSU MacAdmin's Conf Campfire and the Jamf Nation User Conference with virtual presentations.
Yeah.
And they both accepted me, and then suddenly I had to do 3 full-blown virtual presentations. And I think that was an interesting experience because the approaches from the MacAdmin's Conf campfires, they basically did live sessions over Teams, I think they used. It was basically a live session with interaction and Q&A. That was an interesting approach. JNUG used this really elaborate online conference system that people had to log in, and with pre-recorded sessions, which definitely was an experience. And then Mac Sysadmin, where Patrick basically said, make a video. Whatever, do something, build a video. Very different experiences and approaches. I like that.
Well, Jamf sounds similar, with the exception that, like, so it was make a video, but they were going to run it at a specific time. Is that the difference?
Yes. They had a schedule, and they expected us. I like that, actually. They expected us as the presenter, while the recorded video was running, there was a live chat.
Yeah, so, that's kind of interesting. I think, this year I'm absolutely going to get to Mac DevOps virtually. I heard last year was like so well run and everyone was really happy with it. I think he did something similar. I don't know if he used pre-recorded videos or not, but
it was a mix. It was a mix. He had some pre-recorded and some live people.
And while the session was ongoing, he had a Discord channel for conversation. It sounds like everyone really liked that format a lot.
Yeah, especially the Discord was like in between the sessions. It was like the hallway gathering was happening on Discord, and there have been several rooms, and and if you've been, we're from Europe, of course, we've been early in there, and then the first people showed up from the US, and so yeah, it was came quite close to the intimacy that Mac DevOps YVR always had, even also in the in-person event. So they really could translated that to that platform.
Yeah, I'm actually going to have to get back and watch some of the Jamf sessions. I think they're all online. So I mentioned I'm in a new role, and there are 2 pieces of software throughout my entire tech career that people are astounded that I have avoided. One of those is Jira, which people like, if you're in the tech world, you end up encountering Jira at some point. And the other, as a Mac admin, that people are astounded I have avoided is Jamf. And I'm now exposed to both of them. And one of them is not as bad as its reputation makes out. I'll say Jira's not that bad. I'm having a good experience with Jira. Jamf, maybe that's another one. You get me over a beer sometime, and we'll talk about Jamf.
I think we can all share our experiences with Jamf over a beer.
Yeah, I'm not in love with it, but I'm gonna try to take the mature approach that, as a security person, I don't have to love it. I have to secure it. That's my role right now. But yeah.
That's greed, right?
I'm sorry?
best of breed, right? If you need someone else to carry the football for you, Jamf is definitely, in my opinion, the way to go. But there's a lot of other great MDMs out there today if you are running more of an open source shop or have already been doing things. I mean, like the cauliflower vest days, that there was nothing Jamf was doing at that time that was like that, and it was critical that something get put in place.
This could be a bad road to go down, but I will say, like, I don't want this to turn into a Jamf bashing session, but I will say I think my frustration with Jamf is given the supposed maturity of the product for how long it's been out, it really misses the mark in so many ways. Like if Jamf just showed up on the scene last year, I think I would say like, wow, good job. There's some work to do, but good job. But given that it's been a Mac mainstay for so long, it is so frustrating in the things that it doesn't do well, and the things that I'm stunned that they haven't figured out. So like speaking of MDM, Jamf is this two-headed beast, right? It's both your MDM and an endpoint agent. And I think we all realize how fragile MDM is, right? MDM turns out it's not great. And commands get pushed, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Whereas I can push commands through Jamf. If Jamf MDM sends them, it reports success. But you have an endpoint agent on the machine to check if it's actually successful, right? Close that loop. And they don't, right? Like if I'm paying Jamf to do these things, I really feel like they should do so much more for the Mac admin. And like people who are really familiar with Jamf, they kind of go like, oh, you write an extension attribute and you do this and you do that and you do this and you do like these 12 things and it works. Sure, but if I'm paying Jamf, like all of this should be taken care of for me. And I think from a security perspective, like Jamf is probably great if you're a brand new IT shop, you're one or two people, and you're responsible for everything. Jamf is probably the right way to go. It does a lot for you and you can quickly do a lot. But from a security perspective, like once a company starts growing, there's no change management control. Like there's so much power that the Jamf admin console like just lets people YOLO things into existence. From a security perspective, it's overwhelming to me that you like. I understand the point of view that like they're the admins, we trust them, but to not be able to undo some of that functionality is, yeah, pretty maddening.
Yeah, but of course there's strategy to address that. So I think we've shown that almost 5 years ago. And parts of what we did in, bolting something on top of Jamf or put something beside, part of that in a more expensive support tiers you can get from them. So having access to the server logs, although it's Jamf Cloud hosted, all that is available, but it's not like for the small Jamf Cloud tiers. It's more for the paying ones with extra support. So it depends on the scale, but you can get this kind of extra insight that you need because there is a change log that is there. And of course you can scrape that and you can just put some filtering on that and alerting and all of that. But yeah, so
I can agree with that. But that, again, just even not speaking of Jamf specifically, but just from a security perspective in general, like, yes, you can do that, but that's very reactionary. Like, I want to get ahead of these changes rather than reacting to them, like, finding out later on, like, oh, some admin changed this thing. All right, that's good to know, but like, I want to get ahead of those things. I want to prevent them from changing without review or whatever. Like, I started looking at the Jamf API so I could write something that would take scripts that are checked into a certain repo in GitHub and automatically bring them into Jamf. Jamf has this really nice scripts API. Great. But even if I do that, there's still nothing preventing an admin from just going into the console and changing it, right? There's nothing that makes certain what's checked into GitHub is what's deployed through Jamf, right? And that's the worrying thing to me, right? It's like, oh man, I'm so sorry to say this, but like Jamf is the solar winds of the Mac admin community, right? Like it is the one place that like if Jamf gets owned, they, you know, it's rolled out to the cloud product. But even worse, like if someone gets access to your Jamf console, like it's game over. They can hit a button and erase every single machine. I don't love that. So I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. But yes, I do need to start paying a little bit more attention to Jamf.
And I don't want to defend Jamf because I think you've described their shortcomings very precisely. But they have been around for so long and they have so many big deployments that the technical debt has accumulated. And you can tell, like,
yes,
this is technical debt and they have to deal with it. And I think it's totally fair to ask, well, why haven't you dealt with this technical debt? It's been there for years. I think that's totally fair.
Well, I agree.
But
And I think if I was paying attention for a longer period of time, like a lot of people in the Mac admin community have been, a lot of like the interface would make a lot more sense to me. But coming at it new, I look at it and I go like, wow, things are just all over the place, right? Like things aren't as connected as they should be. But if I had worked with the product like back when it was named Casper, right, or whatever, and followed the changes, yeah, maybe the changes were incremental and it makes sense. I mean, I feel that way with a lot of products, right, that have been around quite some time. Like you really have to kind of look at them and say, like, no, this is weird, but it probably made sense at one point in its past. You know, products that get rid of that cruft are magic.
But I think
oh,
you really described, you know, what is the future wish of the people using Jamf, that the connection between MDM and the endpoint agent and the Jamf binary, that this gets a tighter loop and, you know, checks and balances built in. So they certainly can do this. And of course, we all don't know about the timeline, but yeah, so I think there's enough knowledgeable people within Jamf, and they even acquire more and more smaller companies with lots of expertise and nice people we all know.
yes.
So yeah. So and you know, there's this fruit company that also acquired some good people, and potentially it's not that obvious where this turns out to manifest, but I'm very certain that there's development in the right direction. But there's other products.
Why do you have to compare it to SolarWinds, Ed? That was a little too much to think about. You're right.
Sorry, I lost audio for a little bit, but I heard the thanking me for the SolarWinds comment. I mean, it's the closest thing I think the Mac community has to something like that is installed everywhere. Yeah, sorry, I had this weird audio just static for a little bit, but it's back. Yeah, anyway, so just to, sorry, Henry, to go back to your earlier point, like, yes, Jamf has acquired a number of companies now, and people who are deep within the Mac admin community and know the challenges that Mac admins face. So I'm hoping they can get some things on the Jamf roadmap, perhaps. And to your earlier point, because we're paranoid, we run the on-prem version. So as far as I know, we have access to all the server logs, all the APIs. I don't know what the different tiers on the cloud version are. I'm still digging in. I'm still learning it. Like I said, I have to pay attention, and I have to go back through Jamf Nation, and this might be the first year I actually pay attention to Jamf Nation when it's on, when it's a thing. Good. And we were also kind of going into conferences a bit. I'm not sure if we finished that line of thinking. We were kind of talking about attending them and good experiences we've had. One thing I'm thinking about is I know, a lot of conferences now, with the pandemic situation easing a little bit, they're all kind of looking to figure out if they can go live this year or not. I'm not convinced that anyone can. Tell me I'm wrong. But I know as an attendee, I'm probably not yet comfortable traveling to a conference quite yet. And I don't, I see some head shaking. I don't know when I will be. For someone like me who works from home, I don't commute, I don't go out that much. Like, I'm going to get the vaccine, but I'm not in a rush for it. I'm not pushing anyone else out of the way for it or anything like that. So, I'm really interested to see how things shape up this summer. And, going back to one of our favorite conferences, MacAdmin, when will international travel be a possibility? I have no idea. I don't know. Convince me I'm wrong, and convince me that conferences can start running again in 2021, even towards the end of the year.
JNUC very early this year said we will be virtual, even though it's scheduled for October, which, even though with the vaccines, I think there is a chance that we might at least have, in a European or in an American travel by then. But I mean, we have to plan so far ahead. The speakers have to plan so far ahead. The organizers probably even more than the speakers. So I think that even if it will be possible in the fall, it's just we won't know until it's so close to the conference that it's probably better to plan for virtuals for this year, even this fall, and then hopefully have a good season next year.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. How would you feel about a conference that was like half in person and half virtual? Like, let's say again, use MacAdmin as an example. I'm not saying that there's any talk of this. I have no inside knowledge. That's not what I'm suggesting. But let's say it's MacAdmin, and people outside of the EU can't travel there, so there would be a hybrid of in-person people at the event and presenting, and some recorded sessions or people presenting remotely. How do you think that would work for a conference?
I think it would be an interesting experiment. I mean, we've all gone from one extreme where everything is pretty much in person to now the other extreme where everything is always virtual, except for the jet lag that I will have tomorrow because I'm staying up way past my bedtime. and I do hope. I mean, we have Dutch MacAdmin meetings every few months, and we now see their international guests. Because, I put it on my Twitter feed and my weblog, and people are interested. I mean, you have to speak Dutch if you want to join there, but there are some people that we know of in the States who do speak Dutch. So I think that's great. And I really hope that we can get this hybrid model working. It will be very awkward in the beginning, though. There's lots we have to learn to make that work.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Okay, I think we've hit all the topics I was interested in. Does anyone else have anything for Armin? anyone have any general questions that they're struggling with and Mac admin topics in general? No, we're all too smart. Yeah, no struggle. That's nice to hear. I'm definitely struggling because maybe not struggling, but I feel like I came back to the Mac admin world after sort of like a 3-ish year hiatus where I was just kind of watching it on the side, and a lot of things seem the same, but they've like changed very subtly in these very subtle ways that will just sort of trip you up. But yeah, over the coming months for MacAdmin Monthly, I will probably be the one with more questions about how the heck does this stuff work as I dig back through everything and try to find the best way through. So I will be leaning on all of you very smart people to figure that out. Yes, go buy Armin's books. Listen to him on Command Control Power, and go get your tickets for your next event. I think the Mac DevOps tickets just went on sale. I'm going to make sure I go get a ticket for that. All right. With no other questions, thanks everybody. We're going to end this live session, and I'll see you next month.
Bye.